Well, hello, and my name's Louise Savage, and an extremely warm welcome to my channel, Louise Savage Muses. Welcome back if you are a returning viewer, and an equally warm welcome if you are visiting my musings, ramblings, wafflings, whatever you might want to call them, for the very first time. So, my book of the month is a bit delayed this month, as you might have noticed, or last month. It's been very, very busy, but I did an awful lot of reading in October, all of it pretty splendid, almost without exception. But the book that I've chosen to talk about this month is uncharacteristically bulky, and it's a book that I have been wanting to get to for many, many years, and it is Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell by Susanna Clarke. And this is the magnificent 20th birthday edition of this book, and it's actually got some lovely illustrations in it, and it's beautifully hefty. It's lovely to hold in your hands and read. It's a bit heavy reading in bed, I suppose, although I managed fine. I can't find any illustrations now flicking through. Where are we? Here we are. Don't know if you'll make it out because they're quite sort of sepia-y, charcoal-y. Yeah, so I was tasked with reading this book because Simon Savage and I interviewed the wonderful Susanna Clarke for the very first Women's Prize book club last weekend, and it was an absolute joy. And if you haven't watched it, it's still available online. You just need to go to the Women's Prize website and you can find tickets on there on sale. Anyway, and I had been intending to read this book for many years because my youngest son, who I'm sure won't mind me saying was really dyslexic, and he loved this book in his mid-teens. He actually read it twice, and it's this great big huge thing, and I was really fascinated by that at the time. And he kept saying, Mum, you must read this book. But at the time I was, busy, distracted by other things, and I settled for sitting and watching the TV series with him, which I absolutely loved. And ever since then, it's been my intention to read it. And I'm always banging on about how, I think reading long, chunky books is very important. And I love long, chunky books. I love getting involved, but I've realised I don't do it as often as I should. So it was fantastic to have the excuse, if you like, or the reason to finally sit down and read it at last. And in many ways, I'm really sorry, I keep moving it around because it's so heavy. I'm going to lean back like this so I can sort of prop it here. In many ways, I'm glad I didn't read it sooner, because it was that wonderful sort of delayed gratification experience. I got that feeling reading this book that I very, very rarely get, where it felt like I did when I was reading as a child. And I don't mean that this is a book for children. What I mean is when you're reading as a child and you completely, absolutely 100% trust the author, you're totally invested in a world which maybe is recognisable but is not recognisably your own. And you are completely invested in all the plot line, the characters, the lot. I just think this book is an absolute and utter masterpiece. It's not quite like anything else I've ever read. So it tells the story of the two characters in the title. We meet Mr Norrell a long time actually before we meet Jonathan Strange. But they are both magicians. They are both, or at least Jonathan Strange isn't initially, he becomes one. And they are living in the era of Wellington and Napoleon. And it's a time when Susanna Clarke presents magic as a very intellectual sort of academic practice. Nobody's actually doing magic, but many people are studying it and considering themselves magicians. And I really enjoyed that distinction. And right at the beginning, there's a meeting, and this character turns up and says, magic, come on, prove that you can do magic, and nobody can do magic. So they find this magician called Mr Norrell who can and does. And the very, very first piece of magic that he does is in York Cathedral, and he brings some of the gargoyles to life, and it's just the most wonderful description. It's really graphic and visual. So the whole book is about these two sort of worlds. We've got the world of the UK and France in the early 19th century, and it takes you into the Napoleonic Wars. We witness lots and lots of events on the battlefield, but her sort of stance is that these are being influenced by witchcraft, or not witchcraft, by magic. And what happens is that initially Jonathan Strange becomes Mr Norrell's sort of protege, and he teaches him. But eventually they kind of become rivals because they are very different men. They approach magic in very different ways. Mr Norrell has learnt his magic. He's read every single book on magic there is to read. Whereas Jonathan Strange is much more of a kind of instinctive magician. The magic comes more naturally to him. So you've got all of that going on, all that wonderful sort of plot stuff. And then alongside it, you've got the world of fairy, this kind of, not fairies in like Tinkerbell sort of fairies, but the world of fairy in the Old English sense of the word. And there are several characters who are moving between the world of fairy and the real world, in inverted commas, the recognisable world. And the world of fairy is really unsettling. So I think another thing that I absolutely love about the book is its atmosphere. You've got, birds are really important. There are lots of sort of birds migrating, moving, shifting here, there and everywhere. The sea, water, we end up in Venice at one point, and the way the water moves is just fantastic. And actually, I'm really pleased that I read Tracy Chevalier's The Glassmaker very recently, because there were some resonances there between the two descriptions of Venice, which I found fascinating. So if you haven't read either book, it might be quite a nice thing to read them sort of fairly close together, I think. And the landscapes. This book as well, I think, is a love letter to rural England. I mean, plenty of it is set in London. You've got the atmosphere of London. But she goes to, and interestingly, lots of places that I have a real affinity with on a sort of selfish level. So some of the novel takes place in Shropshire. That's where Jonathan Strange is from. That's the county where I live. A lot of it takes place in Derbyshire, which is the county I grew up in. And Newcastle is really, really important as the centre of the Raven King, where his kingdom, was controlled from. And of course, I was a student in Newcastle. So, and Wiltshire as well, where I lived for many, many years. So I just love the way that the novel kind of stalks the land, and, you experience England in the winter, you experience England in the autumn. It tends to be not so much the summer months, actually, I think, looking back, reflecting, that appear in the novel. So it's just fantastic. Another thread that runs through it is the power of books and who should own books. And Mr Norrell has this library with pretty much every extant book on magic that there is in England at the time. But he won't share it. He won't even his student, don't know why I'm making this throat-cutting motion, even his student, Jonathan Strange, is not allowed access to his Norrell's private collection of books. So, and I thought that was raising all sorts of questions. And the period detail, I mean, having read this book, I don't really understand that Susanna Clarke didn't actually live in Napoleonic times, because the narrator it's a third person narration, and it's very, as I said before, it's very confident. It's very, you feel like you're in really safe hands, and the book is laced with footnotes. Don't let that put you off, because you don't have to read them. And actually, I found the footnotes really enjoyable. They're like little digressions as you're reading, which give it the sense that it is academic, that this is a trustworthy well-researched account of what actually happened between the two men. There are women involved in the story. I mean, you know, there are lots and lots of male characters. There's a fantastic, in fact, there are some amazing characters. There's a wonderful guy called Stephen Black, who is black, and he's a sort of manservant, and he's one of the people who can move between these worlds. There's the man with the thistledown hair, who I won't say too much about him, but he's just this character. And then there's Childermas, who is really sort of quite a disturbing individual stalking the pages of the novel. So you meet all sorts of characters, but also I think she's called Annabella. Ooh. But Jonathan Strange's wife as well, she's a really significant character in the story, and it's interesting watching what happens to her. So if you like magic, or even if you don't, certainly if you like historical fiction, I just recommend this book thoroughly. And I think this is a perfect book to read over Christmas. It's got that kind of feel to it. If you want to recreate that feel of snuggling down at Christmas time, or this time of the year, I'm thinking in the Western Hemisphere, I suppose, when the nights are dark and you want something to sort of, motivate you to turn the page, then I cannot recommend this highly enough. I absolutely loved it. Bye.